ephemeral drawer? He said, well, it's short-lived stuff. It's stuff that people, you're not supposed to hold on to it. Bulletins from memorials and flyers for upcoming events and such. But he held on to them. Because it was short-lived, it wasn't worthless. Maybe at some point he'll need to go back and consult, well, when did that event really happen? Where was it held? And so it was important to him. Phil's life in some ways was ephemeral. 60 years is not long enough to enjoy him. But just because it was cut short or ephemeral does not mean it was worthless, worth remembering, and worth holding on to. Has meaning. Others here will talk about Phil as a historian. Oh, you'll have to prepare in a few minutes to have your chance to stand up and talk. Or as a scout, or a brother or uncle. I want to talk to you, though, about Phil as a Christian, which may be why he had told me he would have me speak at his funeral. I said that's kind of a mean thing to do to a friend. But I want to talk to you about his faith in God. Sometimes people, I remember at Lost Valley, the subject of religion would come up. And in order to cut the topic short, people would say, oh, don't talk about religion or politics. And if you know Phil, he had these little aphorisms he would use to turn the conversation. He had ready to go. And in that case, he would say, no, the rule is don't talk about religion with politicians. It was his way of saying, no, we're going to talk about religion. It is important. But it was also his way of saying, I'm not going to be rude about it, I'm not going to jump, I'm not going to shove it down your throat. So he had something witty, ready to say. Ready to keep the conversation going that way, but also to kind of calm people's anxieties. We're going to keep this lighthearted. One time he told me a joke that someone dies and goes to heaven, and St. Peter is showing him around the different rooms in heaven. He says, there's the Baptists, and they're all singing and praising and such. And walks by and sees the Catholics, and they're kneeling and being very respectful. And then St. Peter says, shh, over here are the Presbyterians. And the guy asks, how come that matters? He says, well, they don't think anyone else is here. Phil had told me, he said, that belief in election, that God chooses you, he said, that must be extremely reassuring for people who believe that. But, he knows that he was chosen by God as well. He knows he's a child of God. He had a great deal of confidence in that. One of the things that amazed him, he figured it has to be true, God chooses you, is that he grew up in a home where religion was not terribly important, and yet all three of the boys ended up being faithful churchgoers, and how could that happen unless God has a mark on you and your family? I'm going to tell you his testimony as best as I can, though I'm piecing it together years later. So hopefully if you have some details, you can forgive me or correct them. Somehow, at about the age of 27 or 28, Phil decided as a historian that history matters, that he didn't have any room for this idea that whatever you believe is right for you, and that history is whatever you make of it. He thought that the actual fact of Jesus of Nazareth had to be reckoned with. You had to answer who was Jesus, and you could come up with an answer: he was just an insignificant person. But you couldn't just say, well, it doesn't matter, or it's whatever you make it. As a historian, it wasn't that it offended him religiously, but just as a historian, that you had to answer the historical question of who was Jesus Christ, or who was Jesus of Nazareth. And so he began reading, especially from C.S. Lewis, and eventually became convinced from Mere Christianity of two arguments in C.S. Lewis's book. Now, he was heavily influenced by C.S. Lewis in a lot of his philosophy, but his argument from Mere Christianity was that there's no explanation for why people behave good, for morality, without an explanation of a good God. But then when it comes to Jesus, what to do with Jesus, I want to read to you a quote that I know Phil had memorized verbatim. And I remember him saying it to me various times. He could say it while driving his Jeep. This is from C.S. Lewis. I'm trying to prevent here anyone saying the foolish thing that people often say about Christ. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That's the one thing we must not say. A man who's merely a man and said the sorts of things that Jesus said could not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on a level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He's not left that option open to us. He did not intend to. Now it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was God and is God. Phil said to me, sometimes people talk about the still small voice of God, but in my case, God hit me over the head with a 2x4. This was his experience of reading C.S. Lewis and realizing he had to come to terms with who Jesus is. He never became a fundamentalist, and was a little too traditional to connect to a contemporary happy-clappy church scene, but too biblically grounded to find himself in some mainline churches. And so he kind of found himself as a stranger without a home, I think, to some extent. Well, what difference did his belief make in his life? I have three things. First of all, Phil didn't really have idols. Education wasn't an idol for him, as his 10 years getting through the Cal State. He didn't feel you needed a degree to justify your job. He didn't particularly like being called a history buff. And amateur historian, I said this once recently to get him a little ticked. I told him I was telling someone about you. I have a historian friend, and she's a California historian, and I asked her about you, and she said, "Oh, is he an amateur historian?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, where does he teach? Where did he get his PhD?" He had a deep sense of calling about being a historian without needing a title or a degree to justify his work, and he thought getting paid was an added bonus. So education wasn't an idol. He didn't care how big his house was or what kind of car he drove, even though I think a lot of us tried to persuade him to drive something more fun recently in off-roading trips. Someone would say, well, what's wrong with Phil? How come he doesn't care about these things? How come he doesn't care enough about education or degrees or showing off a big house or having a nice car? But I think, having thought about his life recently, maybe the question is, what's wrong with us? Why do we make idols of these things? And what can we learn from him? Phil saw himself not just as a role model, but as a witness. In other words, he wasn't just behaving morally and upright among scouts and youth and such for goodness' sake, but for Christ's sake. One of his favorite verses, which he indicated in his instructions at his death, was Matthew 5:16. In the same way, let your light so shine before people so that they can see your good deeds and give glory to your Father in heaven. It's a minor thing to point out that he didn't join in profanity and gossip and dirty jokes and drinking. But more significantly, I think he wanted people to know that his religion mattered. Now, he tried out ministry for a while, tried to be a youth pastor. And one of the things he did when he was leading the young adults and college group was to watch episodes of The Simpsons and then dissect the theological, religious claims in the episodes. So I think he probably knew all of those episodes as well. Number 3, Phil had a deeply developed philosophy of friendship. And this was also very influenced by C.S. Lewis, who wrote a book called The Four Loves, in which, by the way, Phil means love. One of the loves in C.S. Lewis's book is friendship love. And C.S. Lewis says, to the ancients, friendship seemed like the happiest and most fully human of loves, the crown of life, the school of virtue. In the modern world, in comparison, ignores it. Now, I think that some of us, and Phil probably saw this happen, as they mature, as their life goes on, friendship becomes less important as family is elevated. And I think I have an impression that Phil would have not let that happen. That he had such a deeply formed view of friendship that he would continue to cherish that. Proverbs 18:24 says, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And C.S. Lewis mentions specifically David and Jonathan in Scripture, Paul and Timothy, Ruth and Naomi, Jesus and Lazarus. Now, at one point, many of his letters to me, he would sign them, love your friend, Phil. Because your friend was too distant, love was too mushy. But friend was extremely important to him. Friends, he would say to me, are those people who you could go 10 or 20 years without seeing, and when you get back together, you pick up right where you left off. He also said in his philosophy of friendship that being a friend is wanting the absolute best in others. And that's how he ended up more recently signing emails to me just saying all the best. One other thing I thought about Phil, when he would talk to little kids, 1 year, 2, 3-year-olds, he would talk to them exactly how you would talk to a grown-up. He didn't do the goo-goo gaga stuff. And this was a philosophy of his, that you treat everybody like they're relatable, rational, important, and not condescendingly. I want to give you an opportunity as well. Christopher and Stephen are both ready to speak a little bit, and then after that, if you can take a few moments to share a memory of Phil, and of course we'll have more time afterward at the reception.
Thanks everybody for coming. My family, my friends, my only cousin. Thank you. Today is definitely a day of celebration. It's definitely a day should be of laughter. Thinking of memories of my brother, laughing about it. It's not a time to be sad. He's in a better spot. As Ken said, when we went through his belongings and my wife found his will, of course my brother had a will because he wrote it 20 years ago when he was 40, like who writes a will then, but he did. Very detailed, made sure that he socked his buddy in to come do the service. But the very first thing that he did write on it was, grieve for yourself, not for me. I truly believe that Jesus Christ will see my soul safely to heaven. And that sums up where he left this earth, and we can all take joy in that. But I just wanted to share a little bit about, my brother had so many different people who knew him, and he kind of had a different relationship. There was the scout guys. There were the history, I call them history nerds, but I guess I can't really call them nerds. The history community. Like Mark Hall, I see you back there. All the people, I remember one time about, maybe not even that long ago, maybe about a year ago, he called me. He was going to go with his buddy and they were going to go do something. I go, what are you doing? He goes, oh, we're going to a blasting fine or something. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, oh, we just go and it's a library, we just sit around and we read books. I'm like, you read books for like fun? He goes, oh yeah, it's the best. So that was clearly kind of the dichotomy between myself and my brother Phil. Because I watch Sports Center. I don't even have a book, but he had many. The scout people, like I was in the Cub Scouts and I made it to my first Weeblos event. And I remember this. I don't have a lot of memories, but I remember this one. So my brother Phil was already a Boy Scout. And I was only a Weeblo, but I liked sports. I didn't like sitting down. I didn't like campfires. I didn't like drinking out of a canteen. I didn't like a metal fork. I didn't like any of the camping world, but he loved it. So we were at a meeting in Orange, pack 241 or 240. My dad had the shirt. He had the shirt on. I had the thing tied up. And I just remember looking down on the ground and there was an eraser, like in the little pink ones that kind of sloped on both sides. And I saw my brother and I'm like, this is awesome. Grabbed the razor, wing! And I winged the razor, hit my brother right in the back of the head. The whole place went crazy. My dad picked me up by the scruff of the neck like a young puppy. That was the end of my scouting career. My brother, as you know, made it as an Eagle Scout, the highest honor. He was just honored the Silver Beaver Award, which I think is a Lifetime Achievement Award. So for all of the scouting people, he loved you, he cared for you. John Nordenstown, I know he spoke so much of your friendship and all the years. Thank you. I also want to announce that through his estate, we will make a foundation charity to the Scouts to allow people who can't afford, in my brother's name, build a foundation for that. So thank you to the Scouts for allowing us to do that. His ashes will be spread up at Lost Valley. Ramona pageant people, I want to say thank you if you're here. I remember when he would wear that vest, and I thought, you would have to pay me a lot to dress up like that. He loved it though. It had a little like pirate vest or something that seemed 2 sizes too small. He loved the pirate vest. But that was his thing. And there was also a thing called the Liars Club. I don't really know all about it, but I guess it was a group of like camping people, and they would go tell lies. And then, does anybody know what the name of it was? There was a lying club or something.
Peg leg.
Peg leg.
Yeah.
And they would sit around a campfire and make up some yarn of some guy. Well, my brother was so good at it that he won it so many years that they finally said, you know, Phil, why don't you just be like the MC so somebody else can win? And he had his vest on and would invite everybody, but for all the liars, peg leg people, thank you for coming and attending. I'm not gonna like go too crazy. He wrote over 40 books. He was known by many, many people, but he was just my brother. And I want to close by sharing the parable of immortality. And it really hit me. Okay. I'm standing on the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails in the morning breeze and starts off to the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength, and I stand and I watch her as she hangs like a speck of a white cloud, just where the sea and the sky come down and mingle with each other. And someone at my side yells, "There she goes." Gone where? She's gone from my sight, that's all. She's still just as large and masked and whole as she was when she left my side, and she's still able to bear the load of living as she was going to her destination. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And at the moment when someone at my side says, "There she goes," there are other eyes on the other shores watching and saying, "Here she comes." Thank you. Be kind to one another. And I think my brother Steve might say something. Thank you very much for coming.